Once your sections are completely described, you can export a stratigraphic column or strat column in PDF format. The exported PDF is intended to be imported into Adobe Illustrator or the like for further editing. To export a strat column, PSICAT needs to know what sections to include and whether to include some or all of each section. You provide this metadata to PSICAT in the form of a comma-separated values or CSV file, which can be created in Excel or a text file editor like Notepad. There are two metadata formats that PSICAT can consume. In this tutorial, we'll discuss the simpler of the two, a section depths file. And before we get into that, I just want to show this. I've created a very simple demo project. It consists of 5 sections. Each is 1 meter long. They contain totally arbitrary, because I'm not a scientist, lithologies and symbols that probably make no sense, but for demonstration purposes, they will get the job done. So we have 5 sections. And our section depths file will have 5 rows as a result of that. So a section depths file consists of 1 or more rows, each with 3 columns of data. So here's the file that I whipped up for my project. So the first column is a section name, which should match the PSICAT project's section name, but does allow for suffixes in the project section name. Then the section's top depth in meters and the section's bottom depth in meters. So if you were creating this in Excel, you would save it as, and make sure you save it as a CSV file, not an Excel file, which PSICAT cannot process right now. I've already saved my file, so I am ready to go. So to create a strat column using this section depths file, you go to the File menu, down to Export, and then choose Strat Column. And now you'll choose your section depths file. This dialog shows how PSICAT matched sections in your section depths file to the sections in your PSICAT project. As you can see here, all 5 sections matched up. It says I found 5 matching project sections for 5 metadata sections. That's good. However, if our names are wrong, or there's some sort of typo in our metadata, for instance, if I added an X at the end of this and saved it. Now, if we try to import this file, we can see that only 4 project sections matched our 5 metadata sections because, of course, we have no project section that ends in AX. Also note that this project section that has this darker suffix did correctly match the metadata section, even though the metadata section did not include that suffix. So suffixes will be matched, but in a case like this, it's not going to work. So I'm going to correct this error. Save it, and pull this in again, and we should be back to 5. Good. So once you're satisfied with how things match up, click OK, and that will open the actual export dialog. So the first thing you see in this dialog is the file that you just selected. If you decide you want a different file, you can click here and repeat the metadata import process that we just demonstrated. And then we move on to drawing options, and there are quite a few of them, but most of them are pretty self-explanatory, I think. Start depth and end depth are both derived from the metadata you provide. So they're simply just the topmost depth and the bottommost depth in your file, which in our case, of course, is 0 and 5. You can change these values if you want to, but note that if any portion of a section is outside the range you've defined, it will be completely excluded from the strat column. If draw symbols is checked, symbols will be drawn in your strat column. So for instance, these ooh lights in our first section would be drawn and included in the strat column. If not, they will not be drawn. Drawing symbols has 2 sub-options. If you choose aggregated, all symbols of the same type in a section will be drawn only once. If you choose every instance, all symbols of the same type will be drawn individually. So again, in this case, we have 2 ooh lights in this section. If we choose aggregated, it will draw only one of those, and it will draw this symbol as well. If you choose every instance, both of these will be drawn separately, and this one, of course, will be drawn regardless. Next option is draw interval widths. If this is checked, section widths will be drawn based on the project's grain size scale. If not, all sections will be drawn at the same width. The default values option will be discussed in a later tutorial. And the other options should be fairly self-explanatory. Once your drawing options are set, choose a destination file by clicking the ellipsis button in Export File. I'll call it Strat Column 1. If the Include Log box is checked, a log file detailing the export process will be saved alongside your Strat Column PDF. It will have the same name as your Strat Column, but with extension .log instead of .pdf. If your Strat Column doesn't look the way you expect it to, the log may help you figure out why. So with that, we've gone through all the options, so let's export our Strat Column here and see what happens. So I click the Export button and get a very fast progress bar because this is a very simple project. And as you can see, I now have two files. I have Strat Column log that detailed the creation of this PDF right here. So as you can see, the Strat Column is a very tall PDF file. It includes a legend. It includes a grain size scale on top. As you can see, our oozes have a very low grain size, but other things like the salt has a larger grain size. I have no idea if that's realistic or not. Again, not a geologist. Also notice that the symbols are drawn at the top of the interval as opposed to their actual position within that interval. And this is because in most cases, there's so many sections in a Strat Column that this section, instead of being very tall, would probably resolve to only a few pixels, to the point where you would not be able to, even if we did draw these symbols at their position in that interval, you wouldn't be able to discern their position meaningfully because the interval itself is so very small. So that's why it behaves that way. Over here on the left, the option draw section names and ranges. This is a demonstration of that here. If I zoom way in, you can actually see the name. It is very small, again, because typically there will be hundreds of sections in a stratigraphic column. So there's our first section, Demo 4B1Y 1A. So those names are displayed, but very tiny along the left side if that option is chosen. We have a legend, of course, which just pulls all lithologies and symbols that were used in the Strat Column or included in the sections that were included in the Strat Column. And it runs from 0 meters all the way down to 5 meters. You can see there are ticks every meter, so that's 4. They're not labeled, although, and again, because this is a very short column, we do not label each tick individually. So one more thing to note. When exporting a Strat Column with section depths, the full contents of each section will be included. If you specify a depth range that's shorter than the section's length, for instance, top depth 0 meters and bottom depth 0.5 meters for a section 1 meter in length, its contents will be compressed to fill that range. However, if you specify a depth range that's longer than that of the section, the contents will not be stretched to fill it. So just to demonstrate compression here, if I modify this, let's see. Let's change the bottom depth of our first section to be 1.5. So now this range is longer than our 1 meter section, so it will not be stretched to fill. And to make things not overlap, we're going to make this top depth of our second section now 1.5. So our 1 meter section is being compressed to a ½ meter here. So if I export a Strat Column based on this, just stretched. Okay, if I export the Strat Column using that, I should have called it compressed, not stretched. We have 5 matches. Okay, these are all fine. Call it Strat Column compressed. I export that Strat Column. Now, you should see we compare this to the original one. So on the right is our original, and on the left is our slightly modified one. And as you can see, this tick right here is 1 meter. So on the right, as we based on our metadata before, it was from 0 to 1, and of course it runs from 0 to 1. In this case, we shortened it to 0 to 0.5. So the full contents of our first section have now been compressed into that ½ meter. However, the second section, which we gave a range of 1.5, so 50 centimeters longer than the actual section's contents, we can see we have a meter of its content here and then a ½ meter of nothing, because PSICAT will not expand that section's contents to fill the range. So it will only compress to fill a range, not expand. And that concludes this strat column tutorial. The next tutorial will explain the other metadata format, which is more complex. It's a splice interval file, but it allows you to do more complicated things as well.